On this week's episode of Made in America, we're talking workforce development. Everything from skill up for manufacturing to competitive wages and a whole lot more. I'm with Bill Villano, President, CEO of Workforce Alliance. Stay tuned to find out what he makes and why he makes it. Welcome to the Made in America podcast. I'm Ari Santiago, President, CEO of IT Direct. And on this episode, I'm sitting here with Bill Villano from Workforce Alliance. Really excited to talk workforce development, all the great stuff that's going on in the South Central region of Connecticut. Bill, thanks so much for coming on with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So it's the Made in America podcast. I got to ask you, what do you make and why do you make it?
We make good employees for Connecticut employers. We train people that are either entering the workforce. We also work with people who are transitioning, either looking for a better job or may have lost their job because of downsizing or plant closings, need some help, either finding a job in terms of that process or need maybe retraining for a different occupation. And we work a lot with school systems and other organizations that work with young people trying to develop our future workforce.
So filling that workforce pipeline, which anyone who's been listening to the Made in America podcast knows, right. Top of mind for manufacturers all up and down Connecticut. So why do you do it? Like, what's kind of the why behind the Workforce Alliance, both to the organization, and then let's talk about why personally for you after that.
Well, I think why for the organization is this is really about Connecticut's competitive future. As you said, almost every day there's an article about skill shortage or people's inability to find qualified workers. So and it's if you listen to Blumenthal, I mean, when we talk about this, especially on the manufacturing side, he said not only is it about economics, it's about our national security because we make helicopters here, we make submarines,
sure.
Right, and aircraft engines. So. And there's a
and a whole lot more too. Not to get too fine a point on it, but right, there's a whole lot of defense manufacturing that goes on in here, including stuff for missiles, radar defense, and all kinds of different stuff.
Yeah. So we need to, and when you're down to where we are in terms of unemployment rates in the country and in Connecticut, you have to train who you got. I was telling my staff, I've been trying to come up with something clever that, the old Stephen Stills song that said, if you can't be with the one you love the one you're with, that kind of thing. So I'm trying to figure out something that says if you can't hire who you want, you got to hire who we got. Or so, I haven't quite
figured it out.
Yeah, but it's, something on that line. So, and then, personally, I think it's kind of rewarding on a sense to see people who are unemployed or struggling or, having some issue. Job is key. Most people define themselves by how they work, and being able to get people into a good job and onto a good career track.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Listen, I'm 100% behind that. As you mentioned, there's articles all the time. Unemployment's low, demand is growing, especially in the manufacturing sector, and we're really looking to build that pipeline. So it's great to have you on to talk about that. I'd love to get into the specific stuff you're doing, and I know there's some models. But before we do that, let's get a little bit of your background, Bill. I mean, you're a Connecticut guy. You've been in kind of the workforce development world for 3 decades, I think. Why don't you kind of talk about
since the birth of Christ? Yeah, in the early 80s is when I got into this, and I haven't figured out what I want to be when I grow up yet, so I'm still doing it.
Still figuring that out. Nice, right? You'll get there eventually.
Yeah.
So what caused you to get into kind of workforce development, and how has it changed from what you were doing when you kind of got started in the 80s to where we are now, almost in 2020?
Well, I think what's changed and what is really a very good change is that in the early times, people used to try to look at labor market data and labor market information and try to project where the need was going to be. And then they'd send people off to different type of training programs and kind of hope at the end of that people would actually get a job in that particular field.
Sort of the if we build it, they will come type of a mentality.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So, and now it's really a demand-driven process, working with employers. And a manufacturing program that that I'm sure we'll talk about, is exactly that design where employers kind of said, this is what we need. It was designed. They were part of developing the curriculum and been part of the oversight process and continue to do so. And I think it's a very good model for all of the other sectors that we deal with.
And so talk a little bit about how that came to pass. So when did we convert from the build and pray model to the kind of more employer partnership model, which it sounds like, is that a fair way to characterize it, more the partnership model?
Yeah. And I think it was because as so here's the thing, in Connecticut, we're the 7th oldest state in the country. We have minimal and sometimes negative population growth. And unfortunately, we have a greater than normal outmigration of our young people, going south and west and that kind of stuff. So, and now we're at an unemployment rate. The national unemployment rate they just announced this morning is now down to 3.5%, which is the lowest it's been since 1969. Right. So when you have all of those things creating some type of perfect storm, I guess, you need to have that type of employer involvement so that you're spending your resources wisely and you are providing the product that they want and that they need now. So that's really kind of how this model evolved, and I think it probably started 4 or 5 years ago when we were experimenting with these customized training projects where we were dealing with a company or a small group of companies to say, what do you need, and can we train some individuals to kind of meet your need individually or collectively. And really the manufacturing model has expanded where we've looked across sectors. And I know you had Chris Jewell on here, right? Okay, so, and he kind of was one of the leaders in that process, but they went to employers, big and small. They have Electric Boat, that 17,000 employees, I think, on their way to 20,000.
Yeah, no, huge growth. Just real quickly, we'll get back to that one. For anyone who wasn't listening back then, I think Chris was like episode 3 or something, and Chris is really involved in Eastern Connecticut with the EMA, the Eastern Advanced Manufacturing Alliance, which works a lot with kind of your partner, the Eastern kind of workforce board down there, and they've done a lot. So just referencing that, I just wanted to clear up that.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. So, so you have the big boy in the room, right?
Yeah.
Electric Boat. And then they have something like 550 subcontractors, and most of them are in Connecticut.
Yep.
And so they went to somebody, whether it was a 20-person fabricating plant or Electric Boat, and said, what can we train people? What can we design so that will have applicability for the entry-level person that you need in your business, and which will give you a person that's much better than anyone you could get off the street. So they designed this 5-week program that covers all the fundamental elements, whether it's blueprint reading or shop math or other types of fabrication, safety, and people come out with that, and it is a good product. And the proof of this is that they're about, I think, almost 3 years into this. They've got 1,500 people placed in about 180 manufacturers. That's the right
definition of success right there, right?
Yeah. So I think it's a great model, and we're replicating that model, and we're about 100 people in. We're a little bit behind, bit behind, but we just started this year. As a result of that model, by the way, the legislature passed a $50 million bond bill to replicate not only that manufacturing program, but any kind of sector that would benefit from the pipeline model.
Right. Yeah. So the manufacturing pipeline is what the model was called. And then this idea of working with employers. So it's fascinating to me that this idea has really only taken hold in the last 5 years. So we've been developing workforce for a long time, but it's really only in the last 5 years that we've kind of gotten into this demand-driven model. Is that fair to say?
I think so. There was always customized training, but it was really more on an individual employer basis. And this is really just broadly to the sector, trying to get all size businesses and whatever particular division, whatever they're doing. So whether they're a plastics manufacturer, metal fabrication, or somebody who makes coating for aircraft parts.
That's right, sure.
Right.
Yeah, stamping, I'm sure, whatever, right?
Yeah, so whatever. So this model produces people that give the core basics that manufacturers need, and then they build on it with obviously on the job training, because different companies, different processes.
Well, listen, I think the whole workforce kind of a board or this kind of pipeline thing. The concept is and correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is there's a set of skills that are probably cross manufacturing.
Right.
So that we need to know. You talked about reading blueprints. You talked about factory safety, quality, right?
Yeah.
Probably lean, all that type of stuff that are kind of across manufacturing manufacturing. And I think the goal of the pipeline initiative has been to develop people that have that baseline of skills so that they can kind of hit the ground running. But then it's on the employer to train the employer's way and kind of take them the rest of the way home, which, listen, I mean, as an employer myself, that's the best I can hope for, right? I want people to come here that understand the basics of like information technology and networking, and we'll show them how to do it the IT direct way. And so it sounds like the same kind of thing.
Yeah, I would also say too that, and most of the manufacturers who listen to this may not like me saying this right now, but I think for a long time, manufacturers expected that the system, the state, community colleges, voc tech schools were going to give them what they need. They were going to give them everything they need. And the reality is, the difference too in this model is that the employers are engaged in a way that they've never been before. To be part of the design, down to assessment process and curriculum process, and to be willing to serve as an oversight committee and do that is something that is also kind of new.
Yeah, listen, I think that also closes the communication gap, Bill, right? So I think employers look at it a different way, obviously, but I think because there was not that collaboration there and people didn't know what each other was doing, maybe some motives that weren't there were kind of imputed to the other party.
Right.
Maybe they were, maybe they weren't, whatever. That's the past. We're moving forward. But now working together, I think we can all agree we're getting a better product, right? Your goal was to get people trained up and employed. Their goal was to find great people to employ. Working together, I think we're accomplishing that. And the 1,500 people in the last few years in Eastern Connecticut, I think proves that out.
Sure. And I'll tell you, so the next kind of phase of this that both the Eastern Workforce Board and Workforce Alliance are working on is a plastics training program. So,
which is, for those that don't know, plastics and all that's huge, big in Connecticut, especially Northeastern Connecticut. Yep.
Right. So we had an initial kind of discussion with some with the community colleges, some manufacturers, and it was amazing to me that employers would come and be willing to spend 4 hours sitting down and having this conversation and be willing to be a part of this new initiative. So it's
fantastic.
I was really impressed.
The real silver lining, by the way, my view, and interested to get your take on it, to me is, despite the headlines about we have jobs we can't fill, we're trying to find people. I think we've had some people on the podcast that have said, Connecticut has jobs in search of people, not the other way around. And I think it's really exciting that because this employer demand-driven model has just begun, that means that it's not like we've been doing it for 10, 15 years and it's not working. We just started it. It's in its infancy. It's really only, to my understanding, really taken off kind of in the Eastern Workforce Board so far.
Yeah.
And it's just starting in New Haven. I don't know if how far it's gotten with sort of the Capital Workforce Partners, I think, is the central, so we can talk about that. But to me, that's exciting. It's exciting that we found a model that seems to be working. Now we're going to kind of double down, triple down, kind of bring that to all the 5 workforce boards in the state.
Right.
That bodes super well. And if we're looking ahead at, manufacturing needs over the next decade of 25,000 employees or whatever, maybe we're on our way to be able to fill that demand, which I think it's fair to say we weren't before. Does that ring true to you?
No, absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's great. So, let's talk about a little bit. I know you wanted to talk about, I think it was Step Up.
Skill Up.
Sorry. Yeah. So
actually, Step Up was a program.
Step Up was a program too. I know I got them confused, but I think Step Up phased out.
Well, ours is the pipeline model. We just call ours Skill Up to differentiate between the two. But so it's not. I should say, as we're moving forward, as we're implementing this, there's a couple of things happening that are affecting this. One is, when you get down to this level of unemployment, there's a lot of people who are unemployed for a reason in a full employment economy, right? So it's a little tougher group to deal with, a little tougher preparation to get through. And we're also now facing kind of a little slowdown in manufacturing across the country, but also in Connecticut. I don't know a lot about the manufacturing index, ISM, but it came out yesterday. It was lower than anybody expected. The stock market took a little tank there and that kind of thing. So, and talking with one of the manufacturers in my region, she said that she's got 150 different customers, and her orders are down across the board. And was talking with somebody who makes some type of containers that most manufacturers use. And that company believes they're kind of the leading indicator of what happens, and their business has been off for 6 months. And she's she's concerned that we're facing a period of time where manufacturing is going to stall. CBIA does an annual employer survey every year, and a good part of that survey of manufacturers, and about 50%, 59, I can't remember the number, percent of the employers are saying that their workforce is stagnant and they're not looking to grow now, where it's a very different situation last year. And one other thing I guess I would say about that is, for years, manufacturing was kind of on the bottom of the barrel in terms of growth, right? Shedding jobs and things like that. For 17 and 18, if you looked on it a month-over-month basis, they were leading the state.
That's right.
Which is
hadn't seen that in 20, 30 years.
Really so there's a little concern about this period, and tariffs are affecting this.
There's no question. There's in the trade war. There's no question that the trade war is having some impacts. There's no question about that. But I think the other component to remember, right, is that while some of that manufacturing, I know automotive's had some issues and whatever, maybe some kind of challenges there. I think Connecticut's got some interesting winds at our back in terms of manufacturing because regardless of kind of what happens with automotive and tariffs and whatnot, seems pretty likely to me that the sub buildup is going to continue. And I think, if you're listening to kind of what you're talking about in terms of the macroeconomics about aerospace, certainly we've got some defense. I know Pratt just got another, $2.2 billion order for jet engines that need to be delivered by 2023, to the Air Force, and any number of military planes being sold overseas. But really the big driver in aerospace now is the growing middle class in the rest of the world and the demand for planes to help huge populations of the world take to the air. And I think, if you look at a little bit of the history in the, the growth of air travel in the 50s in the US was enormous. And I'll botch the numbers exactly, but it was something like in 52, there was 3,000 people took a flight, commercial flight. And by the end of the decade, it was like 30 million or some crazy number like that. And we're going to see that, I think, as well, when you look at what's happening in China, what's happening in India, just in Asia in general, and even, by the way, growth in Africa. Huge percentages of the world population now can afford to fly. And so demand for aircraft to meet that demand, I don't think that's going to go away. Even if there's a little blip in the very short run over the next 10, 20 years, those people are going to take to the air just like everybody else did. And we have combined with that, again, if you listen to what the pundits would say, is that we're also at a point now where the commercial aircraft in the United States themselves are kind of reaching a tipping point where, whether it's Southwest Airlines or Delta or whatever, they're at a kind of a refresh cycle, looking to refresh just to maintain their domestic model. So huge amounts of wind at our back, at least in the aerospace defense in Connecticut, which I think can push us through, the workforce needs, and are going to continue to demand those workforces, even if there's a little bit of a slowdown for a period of time in the other stuff. I don't know if that rings true to you or.
Well, no, this data is a little bit, in a meeting I was in, maybe it was 10, 12 months ago, where Pratt and Electric Boat were in there. Electric Boat said that if they never got another order, right? If they never got another order from the Defense Department, they had enough work through 2037. And Pratt said something similar, 2032 or 4. I mean, there's not a lot of places you can go and say, if I get this job in manufacturing, I have a job for 20 years, right? And I know that's going to happen. The Electric Boat about to build that big Columbia class submarine. That thing is about 2 football fields long. I just can't imagine.
Yeah, it's huge. And anyway, don't forget, by the way, in addition, I think what we're seeing in manufacturing too is that, what they're calling sort of the silver tsunami or the graying of the workforce, that regardless of, how much growth that there's going to be, and I think like we talked about, there's going to be some, but beyond that, just to replace retiring employees who are going to be retiring over the next, 5, 10 years, there's that need there. So, what are you guys doing in the kind of workforce lines to address that and get,
I think that whole, whether you want to call it silver tsunami or what, was that whole discussion was happening in the early to mid 2000s, and the recession fundamentally delayed that, right? And,
no question.
And I'm sure if you've talked to manufacturers, we've got somebody that said, "Oh, we got old Fred here; he's 85 years old, and we won't let him retire," that kind of thing. So, like I say, I mean, the biggest issue is changing, as far as manufacturing is concerned, is changing the mindset of parents and students and educators on manufacturing as a good option.
Are you guys involved in that? Like, is there a role for kind of Workforce Alliance in addressing, helping people to understand the value of a good manufacturing job?
Yes. We've been working with school systems. Here's the deal. I mean, let me just say this. Until we stop judging superintendents' performance on how many people go to college and their guidance counselors, there's not going to be a lot of incentive for people to do that. I said to
It's
the
a
head
fundamentally interesting concept, by the way, which now that you've said it out loud makes an absolute ton of sense, but has not come up in any conversations I've had about workforce.
And there's a lot of parents. I had a staff person that was at Chris Murphy had a Washington seminar thing, and one of the senators or congressmen down there said, everybody wants to support manufacturing, everybody wants, but they don't want their kid to do it, right? They want somebody else's kid to do it, So, I always thought that if I was a manufacturer, I'd have an ad, like when you open the magazine, on one side of the page is the philosophy graduate living in his parents' basement with $100,000 worth of debt,
right.
And on the other side of the page is the guy bounding down, or woman bounding down the stairs, getting into their new car, driving from their condo, driving to their their right. manufacturing job or something, and it's really it's
an interesting. That's an interesting concept, actually.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a slow process, and there were so many years where manufacturing was shedding job, and and it's all that they spend a lot of time trying to dispel the 3Ds, dirty, dark, and dangerous, or whatever, that it's not your father's Oldsmobile and all those kind of things.
Correct.
So and it is a challenge, but a lot of the school systems are. Good news, bad news. Good news is that a lot of the school systems in my region are trying to get into some type of pre-manufacturing, programming. The bad news is that they're all doing it differently, and we're trying to work with them to get them.
And are you involved? I mean, so what's kind of the Workforce Alliance's role in any of that? I mean, do you connect on that? You just see it happening?
Well, we fund some youth programming, and with this manufacturing replication, part of the funding for that was supposed to go towards both for 18 to 24-year-olds, both in school and out of school. Mm-hmm. So we're, as I said, working with some of the school systems that appear to be a little farther down the road in terms of what they're doing, trying to say, look, we want to be able to at least say that when people come out of the program, so whether they come out of Hamden High School or Amity Regional High School or wherever they come out of, they have some of the core that will need it, or they would be well suited academically, because it's a pretty rigorous test assessment, right?
Yep.
Academically, to get into the 5-week program or the 7-week program, plastics or whatever it is we're going to do, and be prepared to do that. I wish I could tell you that it's more an accelerated process.
Right.
It's somewhat slow, but we're moving. What can
the private sector do? What can businesses or manufacturers that might be listening to this podcast, what can they do to engage to help kind of drive this forward, and help kind of drive a positive result?
Listen, I think more presentations to schools, more visits. I mean, you go in a lot of these manufacturing companies. Years ago, we had U.S. repeating arms, old Winchester guns, and that was the 3Ds, right?
Yep.
I mean, it was noisy and oily and greasy, and it smelled, and it was horrible, But, most then we had, we have, trying to remember the new name of the company. It used to be called Firelight Alarms. I can't remember what it is now. But, you can go in there and eat off the floor, and it's very high precision. It's a lot of computer-based. And I think you need to try to do the things that engage young people to look at this and understand that this is more of a technical job, more computer-based, and a good future.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think that the manufacturers are trying to do, but it's a little bit wrong in terms of setting expectations. They say that the average manufacturer employee in Connecticut makes $85,000 or something, but that's everybody who works in the manufacturing company.
Right.
So it's not only the person who's on the shop floor; it's the person who's the engineer, the sales department,
Sure.
All that kind of stuff. So I think it sets an expectation. So one of the issues we've had with graduates is they're expecting to walk out the door and make $25 or $30 an hour.
Right.
I got to say, dude, 5 weeks. You 5 weeks of training.
Right. You got to set some right expectations.
So. But I think they're trying to work on it, at least in my area, it's the Greater New Haven Manufacturers Association. They're doing a lot with school systems, with vocational schools and regular high schools, and that's good, but that's kind of the long range plan, right?
Sure.
I mean, that's
not that long range, right? I mean, there's a number of people that come out of a VOTEC school or even a comprehensive high school and go get a job in manufacturing right out of 18. I mean, to your point, I think, there's a long career path there that doesn't involve effectively buying a house that you never got to live in by getting your college degree. And I think, to go to college and not necessarily what you want to do for certain people who maybe are more mechanically inclined and good with their hands, it's a great option for them, to look at that at a manufacturing career.
I like that, buying a house you're never going to live in. I'm going to steal that too.
Please, Bill, I'm open book, man. You can use any of that stuff as much or as often as you'd like. So talk a little bit about what's been going on, kind of how you guys are picking up on what the Eastern Workforce Board was doing and what you guys are doing. Talk about kind of the overlap.
Okay. So
I think what's great about this, and I think it's good for the audience to hear, is, a thing I hear a lot in kind of the private sector circles is, we've got these different groups in Connecticut, whether they're nonprofits, right? It could be, EMA, NHMA, whatever, those groups. What are they doing to talk to each other? And of course, government always gets that kind of, what are you guys doing to work together? And it feels like working at cross purposes. So I'm excited to hear that, the Eastern Workforce Board did something, and now they're sharing that with the other boards to kind of replicate that in other parts of the state.
Yeah, let me, I probably should have said this when I was talking earlier. We have good manufacturing training programs in the state. The community colleges, have a 2-year program, which is a good, they are good programs. Both schools are good programs. The fundamental problem is they only produce about 600 graduates a year, right? So CBIA for a long time was saying we had 13,000 openings, and they've now kind of revised that down to maybe 8,000 to 10,000 openings. But I mean, you do the math, right? If you're producing 600 a year, okay, so that doesn't work.
Not getting there.
The difference in this design also was, instead of having somebody go and spend 8 months, 10 months in a $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 training program, they can do this in 5 weeks. And it is not producing a comparable graduate, but it's producing somebody who has a pretty good set of basics. You mentioned they come out with a Six Sigma Lean certification of some kind. They're getting 250 apprenticeship hours. I think they do some OSHA 10, some other, so they're coming with enough that says, as an employer, you can train this person, you can bring this person up to speed for what you want. And so we've actually put some training dollars, some on-the-job training dollars into this as well. And you mentioned Step Up before. That was a state-funded program. And a lot of the way the East program succeeded was they married the 5-week program
with a Step Up behind it.
With the Step Up OJT behind it.
So it's fine. So is there going to be, to your knowledge, and I don't know if this is something you would even know, but is there a replacement plan for the Step Up program?
Well, no.
Okay.
So I don't know.
That's a good short answer. We like that.
Well, I don't know if there is, but so as I mentioned, the legislature passed this $50 million bond bill to replicate the manufacturing program and other pipeline initiatives. They released $5 million of that some months ago, and we were fortunate to win in a competition $3.5 million of the 5, and the Northwestern board got 1.2 or something like that. And the bond commission now has just released another $10 million, and hopefully that money will be able to go to some of the areas that don't have it, and will allow us to start to look at pipelines for other areas. My position has been, if you've only released now 15 million of the 50, why not use some of that
to replicate
for the Step Up? Yeah, because the money is already authorized. You don't have to do anything new, and employers really need. The idea of on-the-job training funds to help employers do this is to say, you're taking somebody for the extraordinary costs of training somebody on the job for lost productivity, because you're doing that to bring them up to speed. And most of these on-the-job training contracts are 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks. That's it. To help that employer get through. And it's an incentive, and it allows them to spend the time on somebody who's got, the fundamentals as we talked earlier, but
Maybe not the full
really
degree.
needs-
Yeah, listen, I mean, I agree with that 100%. And you hear people talking all the time about the value of the Step Up program because exactly what you're saying. If I'm looking at someone coming out of a 5 or 10 week program, I'm taking a fairly big risk to try to bring them on. It's going to take me some months to get them up to speed. And so with the low unemployment we are, I think Step Up was really well received, by the employers and really well used. I mean, a lot of people have developed long time jobs for that. So what do you see? I mean, let me ask you this question. You're developing, and I know that the Workforce Alliance and all the boards aren't dedicated to manufacturing, and nor should they be.
Right.
Who do you see, if anybody, that's competing with manufacturers for those same people that you guys are developing? Is there anybody competing? What position does the manufacturing jobs look like against other folks?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, that whole transportation logistics thing. I mean, think about it. I have 2 centers in my region. We did hiring events for the Wallingford. It's a sortation center. First of all, I never even knew sortation was a word. I'm not even sortation.
So who's running those? Who owns those fulfillment centers?
Amazon.
Okay. 2 Amazon fulfillment centers.
So one is a sortation center where they sort stuff and it gets sent and then it ships out. And now we did a hiring event for them where about 500 people went through the event and about 380 got jobs. And we've done 5 hiring events for Amazon North Haven where 1,700 people went through. I don't have the final numbers, but they're already up to 2,000 employees. So I think transportation and logistics, there's FedEx I mentioned in Middletown.
Yep.
So the transportation and logistics is competing. And hospitality is growing. And I always have to preface this because every time you talk about hospitality, people think of the
what? Hotels, waitresses?
The people who make the beds. I'm trying
bed and breakfast. Bed and breakfast? Talking about? Oh, chambermaids. Chambermaids.
Housekeeping. Okay, you're gonna have to cut all that shit.
Yeah.
Okay.
We don't edit. So everything's in, Bill.
Edit?
No edits.
Okay, well then leave that shit in. I don't know.
Perfect.
Okay, sorry, a little.
No, it's fine. Go ahead. Chambermaids.
Yeah,
Sure.
so they think of housekeepers, but there are, according to their state association, there's 17,000 openings. And there's front of the house, back of the house stuff that's way beyond just housekeeping. So and always healthcare, right?
Yep.
Always healthcare jobs. So I think that's what's competing. And as I said earlier, when you're down to the unemployment numbers that we have, you've got a lot of people who have some academic challenges. Transportation across the board is the biggest issue. Getting people to where the jobs are. So a lot of our current and future workforce is coming from urban areas, and a lot of the jobs are not, in urban areas. And so getting people there is a big issue. I mean, I think that's one of the things we need to work on is better transportation infrastructure.
Sure, yeah, buses, trains, whatever it's going to take to get people to work. So as the manufacturers are competing with, say, these like Amazon fulfillment centers, right? What does an Amazon fulfillment person get paid? Kind of, we talk minimum wage starting job? Where are they at?
Well, no, I mean, Amazon globally, or at least nationally, I'm not sure about globally now, nationally has gone to $15 an hour. And some of the manufacturers are still paying $13.50, $13, $14 an hour. And, somebody who's unemployed is going to go somewhere else for that, for that extra dollar an hour.
Sure.
They pay benefits from day one, and they have a good educational reimbursement plan. So if you want to go get some other certifications or whatever, and it doesn't have to be related to the transportation and logistics field, they'll pay for that too. It's a little tough job. I mean, from an entry level, kind of job perspective, that doesn't sound like that sounds like a pretty compelling gig, right? $15 an hour, getting my benefits right from day one, which I know benefits is a big draw to employees. Issue, right.
And of course the education. So even if I'm just looking, to make a career change, maybe it's a great place to go and take a step back, even from if I was doing something in healthcare, but making $18 or $20 an hour, but maybe to go to 15, get my benefits and get tuition reimbursement. That's not bad. That's pretty stiff competition.
And there's a number of other companies that have popped up that are delivering, for Amazon. Mm-hmm. So small little companies, little vans, that last mile that gets gets the box to you the next day,
right?
That kind of thing. I have a friend of my son's just started at 16.25 an hour, doing a shift, just delivering maybe 100 packages a day. Huh. So I mean, so that's that's what's competing with manufacturing on some level, especially as you know, if you, and again, you're paying $2, $3, $4 an hour more to start, people are going to go there.
Sure. Yeah, especially that's going to be, that's going to be a bit of a challenge. Do you communicate with employers on that? Is that a conversation kind of employers have with you, or you kind of stay out of the fray on that?
Well, no, I mean, some of my business service people, we had one manufacturer that when they heard about this, said we want to get in on it, and they're paying minimum wage.
Yeah.
There's
it's going to be hard to compete with $15 an hour if you're paying $10.10.
Yeah. So we have that conversation. I was surprised because when we had this kind of low unemployment rate before the recession, I remember the company that got the contract to run the rest stops on 95 and whatever. They were doing just about everything they could. They were paying a good wage. They were busing people in from New York, to run it because it's a 24/7 operation, that kind of stuff. I don't think there's been a lot of movement on wages for employers during this time period. And again, with what's happening in manufacturing, their conventional wisdom is that we're going to see a slowdown, and it may be somewhat protracted, several months before, and I think they're hoping that whole trade war tariff
goes away and comes back around. So besides job training, does Workforce Alliance do anything else? What else do you guys do down there besides job training? Is that the main focus is on job training? What else do you guys offer?
Yeah, I mean that's fundamentally our main focus, and there's a lot of people who come that we deal with that don't necessarily get trained. They come to our hiring events. They come to different workshops on, interviewing techniques, the kind of what resume writing, all that kind of stuff. As I said, we work a lot with the school systems. We fund a big summer jobs program and that can start with somebody age 14. And all of the data, every report says, if the earlier you attach a young person to the workforce, the more likely they are to be working, the less unemployment, the less incarceration, the greater wages. I mean, there's no downside.
Start early on everything, right? Savings, everything.
Yeah, exactly. So we do a lot of that with the future workforce.
So what do you see that's going super well in Connecticut? What are we doing right as far as workforce development? That you've seen. We actually didn't talk about it, but I know from an earlier conversation you and I had that you're kind of involved in workforce development nationally. So maybe before we even get into what we're doing right, maybe you just want to share with the audience, what have you done in your decades to not just be in Connecticut, but to get engaged with kind of workforce development?
I've been on in our world, the National Association of Workforce Boards is our preeminent organization. And I've been on it 3 different times. What is that?
Recycle?
They keep pulling me back.
Every time I try to get out, they pull me back.
So, so the advantage for me is you do a lot of work at the Hill visits and, getting to talk with different congressional staffers,
Down in D.C.
And also get to travel around the country. We try, because we have the board from all over the country, while we meet a lot in Washington, we meet in other places.
Kind of see what other people are doing in different parts. It's a great way to get best practices.
So I think, there's some great models that work because they're innovative, and they're great models that work kind of because they're circumstantial. And so I just happened to be in Wichita a couple of months ago.
Okay.
And when they said we were going to
Wichita,
Wichita,
I hear that all the time. It's weird.
I said, "Are you freaking kidding me? Wichita? Where the hell did we go?" Right.
Right.
So, but Wichita is like 450,000 people.
Sure.
They've got this major company called Spirit Aerosystems, and it's not the Spirit Airlines. They make components for Boeing, Airbus, so they might make a fuselage here, wings here, that kind of stuff. And Learjet, Cessna are all around there. So they have, as a state, as a county, as a business community, have invested heavily in their education system. So both the community college and their vocational school equivalent have unbelievable. They've invested millions of dollars of equipment, in school. So they're doing what they're doing. It is a total partnership effort, as you were saying earlier, to do that.
And just on that, so you've seen that be successful. Like, what are the results they're seeing in Wichita from this work? I mean, we went to see it, so I assume that means it must be doing something right.
Everybody is placed before they graduate. I mean, everybody. And one model that they did in the school, which I think was very interesting, is that as an employer, as a manufacturer, you can come in and for some really nominal fee, like $80 a month or something like that, you can come in and use their equipment. So you are in there working on their equipment. There are students in there who are working side by side with you. You know what I mean? That kind of synergy is going on. Washington State is doing a lot of good stuff that's training specifically for Boeing. I mean, I think that's one of the things that this manufacturing program in the East did, because 75% of the Electric Boat committed to hire 75% of the graduates. So, some of that was tailored. So when we moved the curriculum over here, we essentially have 90% of the curriculum. We only took out a couple of things that were specific to Electric Boat.
Right.
But so
having that big employer, and actually, by the way, that's talking to the guys down at EMO or whatever, they acknowledge that having, EB available and what they're doing down there in Groton, having that kind of like known, so you don't end up training all these people and have nowhere to go when you have this big employer. Do you guys have that partnership kind of in your sector? And
no, we don't. We're trying to do more with Pratt, and Pratt had developed its own program. They used a couple of training, they're doing their own program. Now, whether they're going to continue to do that, they've hired one of our graduates now, so we're, trying to sneak our foot under the
get in there
in
a little
the door
by
there,
little.
But certainly that makes a difference. And this Wichita thing is like I say, that's more circumstantial. Washington State decided to develop its curriculum specifically to feed Boeing. Right. San Diego has a partnership with the Navy there. So they're doing
big Navy town.
Programming to not only have people work in the yards, but a lot of IT and radar and more sophisticated high-tech stuff.
So is there a model that you've seen? Well, let's kind of get back to Connecticut. So I know you've been around, and the audience now knows. I mean, we've been to D.C., to Kansas, to San Diego. If we talk a little longer, I'll find out about your trip to Anchorage too. But what have you seen that's been working well in Connecticut that we should be doing more of? In addition, if anything beyond sort of the manufacturing pipeline, like is there communication? What's stuff that we're doing well from a state support or otherwise? That
I think what we're doing well is that we've developed and supported this program. I think it's great that even in tough times, and when Governor Lamont has said we're going to go on a debt diet and a bond diet, has recognized that training this future workforce, especially in this economy, is critical. So I think the fact that the legislature funded that is good. I think the fact that people from the education system and the business community are talking and designing things in a way that is much better than we've ever done that before is good. So, I mean, I think we're on the right track. And the fact that we're looking beyond manufacturing to say, yes, this pipeline model works, and yes, we're going to allow you to fund other types of initiatives, whatever that may be, and is also good.
That's fantastic. I mean, listen, workforce, right? It's everything. It's the job currency of the future. What do we have? The people, the talent. How do we get that? And I think that you're working on that is really kind of exciting. So, let me ask you a little bit, kind of getting towards the end, but as we wrap it up here, like, what do you see as the vision? What's your kind of vision for kind of Workforce Alliance? What do you see happening over the next 5 years to help to develop more in the workforce area? What do you see as the vision of your organization?
Well, our vision is this academic deficiencies of, and maybe that's too strong a word, but I mean, the individuals that are coming into the career centers around, and as I said, there's 5 workforce boards. We see probably 82,000 unduplicated people a year that come through those centers, both for self-service stuff, hiring events, and training.
It's a big number.
The numbers of people now that test below some basic skills deficiencies in math or reading or both is quite staggering.
So just to pull on that a little bit, because what does that mean? Like, how do I mean, they don't know addition, they don't recognize letters. I mean, what is the
biggest issue is math. Okay. But yeah, I mean, their basic literacy, numeracy skills fall below 9th grade, 8th grade reading and math, right? So
that's a challenge.
And you need to be better than that.
Yes, you do.
And this, by the way, this assessment that was developed for the manufacturing program is a higher bar than most. I mean, it's like about a 3-hour test, and they not only test math, they test the spatial reasoning.
Sure.
Those things.
Mechanical aptitude type of stuff.
And those kinds of things. So. And measurement thing, that's kind of the softball in there. But,
right.
You'd be surprised how many people kind of screw up measurement too. So anyway, I mean, that's our challenge is working with the school systems, working with the adult educations. There's something called contextual learning, which basically says for adults, having relevance to how the application works, right? To sit and have some kind of abstract math discussion doesn't really do well.
Yeah.
But if you're working on fractions and you're working on that stuff, and then you go into the shop and you have to drill holes and measure and do things, so that kind of practical contextual learning works best. So we're also trying to get the school systems and some of the colleges to do more of that, because that truly nationally tested is the best way to train adults.
Yeah, so to get the contextual training and get them in there. So, I mean, so what's your vision of that future? They're going to get more of the same. Sorry, I kind of interrupted you when you're on that.
Well, no, but I think we need to do more of that. I mean, again, and I know I'm kind of repeating myself and harping on this, but the reality is that, we're getting older, right? We're not growing population. Migration is another, immigration rather is another issue in terms of how we can get people in. And by the way, a lot of the times when state did growth, it was either from immigration or in migration from places like Puerto Rico or whatever that are citizens. So I guess I think that because of all of those things, we really need to say we have to train who we are. Employers, I would say, are beginning to take more chances on people who have some criminal records, I mean, if you're a murderer or a child molester, you're still going to have problems getting a job, but employers are much more willing to take a chance on somebody who's had some criminal justice involvement. We're going to have to do more of that. We're going to have to do a better job of, preparing who we have.
Listen, yeah, I mean, when you're down to basically full employment, that becomes a big challenge. And it sounds like you guys are making strides. Are you optimistic about what you guys are doing and being able to meet the needs of employers?
Well, I'm optimistic on the direction that we're going in.
Yeah.
If we continue, if we kind of get through this blip on manufacturing and we don't enter a recession, it is going to be challenging to get people up to the speed that employers need to be able to function and produce their products effectively.
Well, that's why we're investing in those workforce boards to help staff you guys up and give you the resources you need to kind of meet that challenge. And it sounds like you guys are up to the task and willing to kind of roll up your sleeves and make it happen. Are you working closely with the other boards as well beyond just the Eastern board?
Yeah, because there's only 5 of us.
Sure.
We have a state association for the 5 of us, but we work collaboratively. That's another thing. The 5 workforce boards have been very successful in winning a lot of discretionary grants. So there's federal job training dollars and state job training dollars, but there's a lot of money tied up in these discretionary grants. Under this administration, they've pretty much dried up. So there's a lot of. I have had 4 or 5 collaborative projects with the East. One with the Western board. Two of those boards. So we work very well together, and because we're a small state, I think we can be a little bit more effective, a little bit more efficient than maybe California or Texas or someplace like that.
So before I get into kind of our rapid fire round of questions, we'd love to end on. I wanted to ask you,
is there a pass fail on that?
There is, but we'll see. I'll let you know as we go.
Okay.
But what I did want to kind of ask you is, if there's one thing that you think either the private sector or the state government or the feds, like one thing that you say, hey, if we did this, it'd really make a big difference in being able to meet the needs of employers, what would that one thing be?
I think it's more employer involvement and engagement in this process. The Eastern Board was successful because their business people were in it from day one and they were all in.
Yep.
I can't say that is the same in my region, and I'm not sure it's the same in other regions. I mean, I think that employer involvement, that part of the design and the oversight is critical for us to be able to do this.
And how would an employer engage with you if they wanted to? And I mean, is it a matter of not knowing, like, what did the Eastern folks do that
we can probably do a better job in getting out. So my program, Skill Up, interestingly enough, got a chamber award for manufacturing. So they just gave out their kind of community awards, and normally they gave it to a manufacturer for some unusual price. So they gave it to us. So when I stood up to accept the award, I mentioned that we were going to plastics next. And a guy came up to me and gave me his card and said, how do I get involved and whatever. So, I think we can be better in terms of getting the information out, and employers, like I said earlier, I mean, I think that we're moving past the expectation that the state is going to have the whole responsibility, and that they need to be involved in some
And I'm not even sure that anyone necessarily ever wanted that or thought that was a good idea, but that's, I guess, how it sort of developed. Right. So let me just pull on that a little bit, which is, what are you guys doing to get the word out? Because I would agree with you that I think in most of the state, people that live in the region don't even know what their, regional workforce board is doing or how to engage.
We've been really ramping up our whole communications effort, in terms of appearing on a show like this.
Yes,
is
we're
really
happy
good.
to help spread the word.
We're preparing a video now that we've got the program underway. We've got some people out employed, that kind of stuff. In fact, when I leave here, I'm going to film my little piece of that.
Okay.
We're trying to do that. We're making presentations. We've got we're developing more. I've got an advisory committee, for example, for manufacturing, which is made up of local manufacturers. We're hoping that our manufacturing association gets the word out in a more effective way than they have, promoting it. So we're getting there. We're getting there. And as I say, Eastern Wib is about 3 years into it. We're about 6 months into it. But I am optimistic. That was your question about 10 minutes ago. I am optimistic that we're going in the right direction, and people are coming together in a way that's going to make this work.
Well, what you do is really important, and developing this workforce and having the workforce there. We talked about before, workforce.
Yep,
it's everything. And so it's great to have, you so much engaged in this thing, and bringing, your decades of experience and seeing what's going on in other parts of the country. And I think helping engage with the employers, I think getting the word out so we can engage with you more and help to drive that pipeline, which I think is just that virtuous cycle, right? And we've said for a long time, I believe it personally, it's something I've tried to bring up on this podcast, which is, if we're going to be successful, we all need to work together. And that means across manufacturing companies, across town lines, between organizations, NHMA and EMA and Genetic Technology Council, all those groups, have to work together. And that involves the workforce board. I mean, everybody, I think, has an important role to play. CBIA has an important role to play. And we need to get in the boat, make sure we're rowing in the same direction together. And it's great to have you. I mean, you reached out to participate in this podcast. I think it was a great kind of way to reach out. And I hope you're going to continue to do a lot more of that.
I certainly am. Thank you.
Cool, man. Well, let's get into the rapid fire round of questions. Are you ready? All right. So these are hot take questions. So we're just going to go after it.
Okay.
Red Sox or Yankees?
Oh, Yankees. Come
See,
on.
All right, now you're failing. Starbucks
No. Wait. Well, I'm surrounded. I mean, I'm surrounded by...
That's right. That was supposed to be the tip-off of the right answer there, but that's okay.
Oh, but let me just say one thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
I went to the last game, Jeter's last game in Boston.
Okay.
And I have to say...
Classy.
They did it right.
That's right.
They absolutely did it right. So I give Red Sox the organization all the credit for doing that.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Well said. Well said. Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts?
I don't drink coffee.
Whoa. On vacation, you prefer staycation or exotic destination?
More exotic destination, absolutely.
iPhone or Android?
iPhone.
Sports car or SUV?
Neither, I guess.
Okay.
I have a Hyundai Sonata. It's a turbo. Does it count?
It does. If you could do anything other than what you're doing now, kind of running the workforce board in South Central Connecticut, what would you do?
I don't know. I always thought that either being a professional athlete or a professional musician would be best, because they paid you to play what you wanted to do.
Do you play an instrument?
A little piano, a little guitar, but I haven't done it in a while.
All right. Well, if you're going to go pro, go with the guitar.
Okay.
Do you have a favorite business book?
Yes, and I can't remember the name of it. Peters. What the hell was it? A long time ago, I'm trying to remember his name. Peters is his last name.
Yeah.
He was the kind of this business guru guy, and the book was not like a boring old. It had lots of pictures and big writing and all this kind of stuff. And one of the things that he said that I learned from that, it said, reward failure and punish indifference or something like
Yeah.
that, right? But basically say don't, right?
Can't make anything great without taking risks.
Absolutely, and some of them aren't going to work out.
That's right.
So it was my favorite business book, but what it is,
What the name of it is,
the
you don't
name of
remember.
the author, I don't.
Well, we'll
have
look it up and we'll put it in the show notes. That way anybody can look it up.
Good.
So what's one thing that you think you learned early in your career, Bill, or early in your life that sort of propelled you to be where you are and to the success that you've had?
I don't know. I think always listen and be fair.
Okay, that's good. What's one thing that you learned later in life or later in your career that you wish you could go back and talk to young Bill and tell him that you think would be of particular value?
Have some kind of filter on what comes out of your mouth.
Fair point. Fair point. We probably could all use, I know I certainly could use a little bit of filter.
Yeah.
Well, listen, thanks so much for coming on. If people want to get more information about the Workforce Alliance and what you guys are doing on the workforce board there, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Well, email, our website is workforcealliance.biz.
Okay.
You just Google it, email me, call me, whatever.
Why don't you give us your email?
Okay,
we'll put it in the notes too.
It's Villano,
Yep.
Villano at workforcealliance.biz.
There you
And
go.
my number is 203-562-7811.
There we go. Look
There
at
we
that. Everybody, no chance they can't reach you now. And Bill,
Right.
we're going to put all of that in the show notes so anybody can
Right.
look it up, whether they listen to Apple Podcast or YouTube or anywhere else. They'll be able to
Right.
look that up. And so I'd like to wrap up with this last question. We've been around the block a lot today on a lot of different stuff.
I thought the questions were over, man.
No. You got one more,
Okay, all right.
which is just thinking about what we talked today and all the different stuff we've gone around. And
Yeah.
I know it's been a lot about workforce. For the listeners here, if you said, hey, one big takeaway that you think they could have that would drive some real value, if it was just one of what we talked about today, what's the one thing you think?
I think one big takeaway may be to never stop learning, continue to get whatever certifications you can. If your employer offers it, take advantage of everything because, credentials are everything here.
That's
and
great.
It's constant learning.
There you go. Come from someone who places people for a living. I think that's
Yeah.
great. So for me, I think the big value takeaway that I got out of today, and that was a good one that you brought up, but we came around a number of times to the private-public sector partnership and how critical that is to success in driving and building the workforce that's going to meet the needs for today and into the future.
Right.
It's such an important point. I don't think it could be overstated in
Right.
any way. I'm so happy that you brought it up. So happy that you're so engaged and open to working with the private sector. So hopefully people that are listening heard that and will take action to get engaged, because working together, a rising tide will lift all boats. And there's a
Right.
big positive future for Connecticut if we can do that. So thanks so much for
I
your time
appreciate
today,
the opportunity.
Bill.
Thank
All
you
right,
very
man.
much, Ari.
Absolutely.
Made in America with Ari Santiago is brought to you by IT Direct.
As always, thanks so much for tuning in. I definitely want your feedback and hope you subscribe. But what I want the most is to build a community where we learn and grow with each other. I hope you're getting a lot of value out of the time we're spending together. Thanks so much for listening. I'll see you next time.